And we're looking at a number of different dimensions. We're looking at both what we call the hard infrastructure, which would be the transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and then also various soft aspects of connectivity, finance, cross-border finance, trade facilitation, and policy reform, particularly trade agreements, free trade agreements, and then also institutional aspects of it. And then what we did at the end was a CGE modeling exercise to try to estimate the benefits of all these policy interventions. So first, let me talk a little bit about background and motivation. South Asia and Southeast Asia are both rapidly growing, but they have not established a strong trade, investment, financial links with each other. And in a world where the advanced economies are showing on the whole rather sluggish growth, it's important to find additional ways for these two regions to be able to rely more on their own domestic and regional steam. Greater integration could bring substantial benefits in terms of growth, investment, education. So we could see increased scope for economies of scale, greater diffusion of FDI, deeper and wider integration through trade agreements, and also positive impacts on poverty and conflict reduction. And particularly within the FDI, I think this importance of developing supply chain networks is a key aspect, because although the supply chain networks have been very successful in Southeast Asia, they're still at a much more limited stage of development in South Asia. So one of the big concerns of the study is to try to find ways to bring South Asia more into those supply chain networks. The third point is that with the opening of Myanmar in both economic and political terms, this creates a new set of opportunities that weren't there before. And finally, relatively few studies on this topic, and certainly none that we're aware of that takes this aspect into account. So let me whiz through the various components of the study, just to give you kind of a flavor of what we've been doing. So transport infrastructure, looking primarily at roads, railroads on the land side, and then ports in terms of the sea connectivity. And in general, for roads, we find projects relatively attractive since they're relatively low cost. Railroads, much higher cost, and much bigger gaps in terms of actual route linkages, but also things like differences in gauge, differences in braking systems, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's really ports that are most important, because probably 99% of the trade between the two regions is by sea or by air. Now, air is not covered in the study, but now there's a slight contradiction here, because we're talking about ports, ships can go from any port to any port, so you can't really say this is strictly South Asia, Southeast Asia, because those ships can go anywhere. But if you want to influence trade between two regions, then you really have to tackle the port issues. And so what we've done is to focus on encouraging more direct calls by container ships in the Bay of Bengal ports, and to try to lower shipping costs and thereby encourage participation of South Asia in the supply chain networks. And this table just summarizes the costs of the various projects. So we have the road projects, rail projects, port, and also energy projects. And you can look at the numbers at your leisure. Now, in terms of the land transport, we had kind of a two-stage approach where we focused on corridors or corridor extensions that can link South Asia and Southeast Asia. And of course, the development of corridors in Southeast Asia has been quite advanced given the efforts under GMS. And so we had a two-stage approach where we identified the priority corridors using scoring methodology based on these items. Then, once having those corridors, then we identified priority investment projects using another set of criteria. And this shows what we came up with. So the key corridor, we think, for road transport essentially runs from the Chicken's Neck up in India through Myanmar, then into Thailand, and then mainly down this way through Cambodia and Vietnam. And the key sort of missing links here, or at least the links that need to be developed more, are at the Myanmar border, and then at the Myanmar-Thai border. And so we've highlighted those in yellow, also a little bit between Thailand and Cambodia also. And this table just summarizes some of those key projects. And for rail transport, relatively similar story. Where again, the main route is running from northeast India down through Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. But you'll notice that these the gaps are much larger. So the red lines are the new track. There's no track there at all now, and then the yellow lines are a track that needs to be upgraded. So there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done on rails. And so we tend to think that rails are probably less of a priority than roads. These are some of the key projects. And now going on to the ports issue, what we find is ports in Bengal, in the Bay of Bengal, rely on a feeder system to which larger ports such as Colombo and Singapore, so that makes it inherently higher cost because everything has to be transshipped at least once, and the problems are relatively shallow drafts in a number of these ports. Limited traffic also reduces the incentive for port calls by large ships, and so if you want to lower costs in this area, you have to find a way to increase the efficiency of the ports, their capacity to accept large container ships. And so that's been kind of the focus of this study. And so these are some of the projects we identified. And now going on to energy infrastructure and trading, we see quite a few examples of trading within the two regions, but not so much yet, or nothing really across the sub-regional. However, there are major opportunities in areas of hydroelectric power, transmission, and gas. And particularly, Myanmar can play a key role in this because of its large reserves of oil, gas, and also hydropower capacity. So again, we've identified some specific projects there. Now going on to infrastructure investment financing, obviously, where is the money going to come from? That's the key question. And there are a number of barriers, in particular for cross-border infrastructure investment. There's both the domestic financial capacity and the degree of financial integration. And so and given the limitations on traditional sources of finance like public finance, we've got to look more at ways to develop private sector sources. Now this table just summarizes the sort of funding capacity of the various countries involved, looking at total private credit, stock market capitalization, public-private debt. And what's particularly noticeable is that there are a number of countries in both regions which have gaps. They don't have any, for example, a number of countries don't have private bond markets, and some have very little in other areas too. So there are significant gaps here which do constrain the ability to carry out this kind of finance. Public-private participation is a very important aspect, and what we found is that India actually has been very successful in this area. So it'd be interesting to look more at the experience of India here. Trade facilitation, a number of areas that need to be addressed here. Accession to the signing of the revised Kyoto Convention, the adoption of the ASEAN single window, also perhaps extending the ASEAN single window to South Asia. In terms of trade investment, as far as tariff barriers go, they've already come down a fair amount, but can go somewhat further. NTBs, the non-tariff barriers, are still a bigger problem. And we think that expanding broad-based FTAs between the two subregions can reduce these barriers to trade investment further. So now going on to the CGE modeling, we used a state-of-the-art CGE model and considered 4 scenarios here. First is just removal of all tariffs associated with South Asia, Southeast Asian trade. Second is scenario 1 plus 50% reduction of the inter-subregional NTBs. Third is also that plus reduction in transport costs by 5%. And finally, a reduction of transport costs by 15%. So just to summarize the results, if you look at the scenario 4, which is the most positive one, we find that for South Asia, we get total benefits of around 8.9% of GDP as of 2030, and the impacts are generally pretty strong across all countries there. So that this suggests that there are quite substantial benefits from a combined package of measures of this kind. For Southeast Asia, the impacts are not quite as large. It's already coming from a sort of a more integrated and advanced base, but still looking at 6.4% increase overall. Thailand, in particular, coming out just close to the average, around 6%, and the total benefits in absolute terms about $193 billion. So let me stop here. Thank you.
You right on time. Next, I have Professor Sisha Chapchimpan for discussions, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and after that, anyway, because we share the microphone, I'm going to take it out.
Okay. Thank you, Peter Morgan, for your presentation. I actually have already read your presentation beforehand, and I have already found that it has already published in like a book, interim report. Peter have already told us what are the missing links across Asian countries in terms of transportation methods, and he suggests us how to gain more benefit from improving connectivities of rural and financial infrastructures. I would like to know your opinions on what is the optimal logistic design for connecting Southeast Asia. According to your main finding, you said that the priorities goes to highways and ports. So is there any reason behind why it has to be highways and port? Can we do just only one highways? Or we have to do both highways and ports? And according to your CGE models, transportation costs would be reduced by 5% assumptions and 10%. And where does the number come from? Can we ask, and I just would like to know how can we estimate the benefit gain from improving each transportation method? Because it's just like in Thailand, sometimes we wonder, should we invest $2,000 million on to improve railways systems? So if we know benefit gain from connecting each transportation method, it may help. In my opinion, financing the project shouldn't be big problems as long as the project is very profitable. And according to the calculation, I found it's quite very profitable. Comparing the cost of improving infrastructures and the welfare benefit gain, it seems that the project is very profitable. And is there any particular concerns on the risk of the projects, in your opinions? And I also would like to hear your opinions on how likely the free trade area across like Southeast Asian countries, how likely it will happen. And if it was not the case, shall we still gain some benefit from improving connectivity? And another, like the last one, I think perhaps we may do like scenarios, many scenarios on CGE models. And that's all from me.
So thank you, Tisha. So I think it's time for the floor, questions from the floor. Take some 4 or 5 questions. Okay.
From a inter-regional point of view, because this mostly discusses between Southeast Asia and South Asia, I was wondering if your model takes a look at trade diversion within South Asia, because I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but the level of inter-regional trade in South Asia is much lower than that of Southeast Asia, and whether boosting trade with Southeast Asia will have negative impacts for landlocked South Asian nations that don't benefit from having a port in the direct trade routes between these 2 areas.
All right, thank you. So, Brian.
Yeah, Brian Kennedy, Thomas University. Just in looking at the maps, I kept noticing Burma, and for any kind of non-port transport system that relied on going through Burma, I would be really worried that their government would hold it hostage, collapse, not want to integrate, do various other things. Did you run any simulations of your model, kind of where you looked at what would happen if Burma suddenly withdrew? And what would the effects of that have been?
I have one.
May I follow your presentation? So I would like to share my different point of view, because you said Myanmar has an important role, potential role to play energy infrastructure in this region. But I think it's going to be Lao PDI instead, because the Lao government announced that they're going to be the battery of Asia. They said that, and last month they just signed an MOU to sell electricity to Singapore. How would it happen? It's going to pass to Thailand and Malaysia to Singapore. So now start exporting that, and they have capacity about hydropower a lot. So maybe it's good to look into Lao PDM too.
All right. I'm glad we have a Myanmar student here, so it's good to have her, and then we're gonna hear some point of view, and after then country, then I'm gonna have, I don't know your name. Later then, okay, please attend.
Okay, concerning on Dr. Bishop's comments, I also have the furthers on that, because in order for connectivities of the electricities, then needs the transmissions, and there also is questions about the standards of electricities among countries in Asia, because we worry about stabilities of the system. So if we're gonna have the trade and connectivities among countries in Asia, then the standards, the course of standards must be settled. But at this stage, according to I listened to the regulators for power regulator in Thailand. She says we have no improvement of this at this stage. So it's not like that. The connectivities, infrastructures of the energy sectors in Asia might be a bit delayed because we do not have this kind of standards. Otherwise, the problem might occur like what happened in EU's like Germany and Austria, right? That has a problem with different standards of the system.
You Kuku? Okay.
Actually, I was work for the pipeline project in Myanmar. So I have found some issue about that. They haven't compensated actual amount to the landlord owner, and also the others problem either. Hydro project also some conflict between the community of that area and also the governments they have. So it's really depends for that. And another issue is because of that problem for the trade route area, the local people will be upset for that because I saw there is something gap between that. It actually is some not unstable area. So how they will negotiate with that local enforced, yeah. Because of it recently happened about the Thai input to our government and something blocked. So I have a little bit concern about that.
Okay, I'll give it back to
Karen, yeah.
to Morgan, and I think let's just could you like summarize a little bit? I mean, we can discuss later on the seminar. I think we have provoked some many thoughts and we released some discussions, and I think it will be fun after that without time limitation. So just in these sessions, would you just give just like a brief response to those questions, please? Sorry for that.
Okay, well, I guess it's a very broad comment. Maybe I should have said it more explicitly, but I never claimed this was going to be easy. And if you, partly because I had to compress it into 12 minutes, I couldn't add all the caveats. But just in the case of energy trading, you can see the whole list of barriers over there. So again, nothing easy or automatic about that process. Now, just in terms of the coming up with sort of separate cost estimates for the different transport modes, we weren't really able to do that, at least in the scope of the current study. Maybe we can go back and try to figure out different assumptions about, let's say, road only versus ports. Now, of course, given that by far the bulk of the transport still goes through ports, it's not ultimately most of those benefits presumably are coming from the port side. In terms of the what happens if you don't get the trade agreement, well, I think we can back that out pretty easily just by sort of subtracting the benefits from the trade agreements from the benefits of the trade agreements plus. So that would give us at least an approximate view of that, or maybe some overestimate. Finance. I think if they're very profitable projects, yes, it should be fairly easy, but sometimes you have situations where projects may, particularly if they're cross-border projects, may have differing costs and benefits across for the various partners involved in it. So how you share those benefits is one aspect. The FTA, well, in terms of a South Asia, Southeast Asia FTA per se, probably not so likely, but I think that this is just kind of a way of showing benefits, and the most likely candidate, which again, if I had more time, I could have gone into it, would be the RCEP, which includes ASEAN and India, which of course would be the biggest trader. A very interesting question about trade diversion. Let me just, actually, let me go back to that slide. What if Myanmar drops out? No, that obviously that would be a big problem for our land transport scenarios. But again, given that the bulk of the trade is going by sea, that's not going to alter the overall picture that much. And in terms of, again, of all these issues about unrest in Myanmar and various conflicts, yes, that's certainly an issue that has to be grappled with. Now, the the hopeful aspect is that because of the benefits of, or the potential benefits of these kinds of projects, that hopefully that can be a sort of carrot that can be dangled in front of various groups to help move toward some kind of conciliation process. But let's discuss it further afterward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morgan. So we come to the last paper. Time flies when we enjoy things. And now we have like transitions to the Western world to the Eastern world, have some traffic developing, connecting the Southeast Asia. And now we extend the benefits to the Pacific economies. And Matthias Helry gonna present us the benefits of the Pacific economies. And we're gonna same rules again, 12 minutes for presentation. I'm gonna cut out some discussion time.
Thank you very much. So this is work that is based on a forthcoming report, so it's still work in progress, and we try to finish this report by the end of this year. So I'm looking very much forward to receiving your comments. And yesterday I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and on the front page there was an article entitled "West Woos Fiji After China Gains." So the Pacific is getting more important for Asia, and there was a second important topic for the Wall Street Journal, it's that Godzilla turned 60. Anyways, so this report looks at the connectivity between Asia and the Pacific. The motivation of this study was that Asia has been growing very successfully over the last 2-3 decades. However, the Pacific was less successful in pushing forward, and so the idea was what can be done to make the Pacific benefit more from Asia's growth. So I'll give you an overview of this report and talk also about the data challenges whenever you want to work with data from the Pacific economies, give you a brief overview of summary of the chapters, and the key messages. So what is the underlying idea? We basically have the Pacific, which is literally far away from Asia, and at the moment we see economic linkages between the two. However, there are a lot of barriers to increase the linkages between the Pacific and Asia, and so how can we make these barriers smaller and thereby increase the linkages, so ultimately the Pacific becomes bigger. And this also needs to be considered in the broader context. We have the US and the EU with some economic and political interests, and also Australia and New Zealand. So what are the main research questions? The first one is how have the economic linkages developed between the Pacific region and Asia? Then we try to identify the biggest opportunities for growth. For the Pacific, we call them EMC, so these are the developing member countries in the Pacific that belong to the Asian Development Bank. What are the non-structural constraints to increase linkages? And what policies should be adopted? And also we talk about regional integration efforts. So just to quickly talk about the data challenges, because these countries, as you will see in a minute, a lot of them are very small, and the data is often not as what an economist would like to have, because they're very incomplete. They are rather anecdotal, so it's often very hard to come up with models, with simulations. And one needs to also try to bridge these data challenges using all kinds of tools. So this is certainly a challenge when you work with the Pacific. So first of all, we thought it's a good idea to group the Pacific countries into 3 groups. The first group are countries that we think have some capacity for self-sustained growth, namely Cook Islands, Fiji, Palau, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. These are countries that have reached a certain level, that have a lot of tourism, and we think that they can grow further by themselves. Then we have rather poor countries, but that have a lot of resources like PNG, Solomon Island, and Timor-Leste. And then we have countries that are small, these are microstates, and they have a very hard time. If you take the example of Kiribati, they are actually 21 islands spread over the same area as the Indian subcontinent. So a very difficult context to grow. A very, very quick overview of these economies. We see that the population can be very small. Cook Islands, 15,000 inhabitants. The biggest one is PNG with 7.5 million. These are small, really small countries. The land area is also quite different. The GDP per capita ranges from 20,000 to 1,000, so a big heterogeneity in all kind of ways, in all dimensions. And also the GDP growth was very diverse. So then we thought, what actually are the main drivers of the growth in Asia? So we know that in Asia we saw the emergence of regional and global production networks. We also saw a lot of efforts for regional integration. Some of these sources of growth can be applied to the Pacific. However, for example, when we talk about networks, it's very difficult to imagine that Pacific economies will suddenly start linking into these production networks because they're just too far away. So we thought about what can be the sources of growth for the Pacific in Asia. So we thought, yeah, the strong economic growth in the Pacific will certainly give some opportunities for the Pacific in terms of export of resources. The growing middle class in Asia will also provide more tourists to the Pacific. The increasing urbanization might also offer opportunities in terms of maybe some products like food products that can be conserved and shipped to Asia, and also the demographic shift. Very quickly, the export and import, so the trade linkages between the Pacific and Asia. So these are the exports of the Pacific countries to the world, and you see the red line, the exports to Asia, they have actually increased a lot between 2000 and 2012. When we now look at the imports, we see that imports have even more increased. The reason is that the manufacturing base of the Pacific has been eroded actually, because I mean these countries are small, they have a hard time competing with Asia, so the trade deficit with Asia is actually increasing. This has been financed by an increasing inflow of tourists, but also through aid flows to the Pacific. So another trade linkage is actually tourism. This is the main source of trade and services. And on the right-hand side, we see actually the number of tourists. So there is a constant increase in the number of tourists going to the Pacific. This pink share shows the tourists coming from the rest of the world. Then the green one shows the tourists that come from Australia and New Zealand. And finally, the blue one is the share of Asian tourists going to the Pacific. And what was very surprising for us to see that whereas the share of tourists from Australia and New Zealand has always increased over the past 10 years, the share of Asian tourists has remained very stable, even though Asia was growing rapidly. So our conclusion was that there is a big potential to attract more tourists from Asia into the Pacific. We also ran some gravity models to see which countries could be the biggest source, and we think that China and Indonesia could actually be the biggest source countries for the Pacific. We also look at other economic linkages like FDI, and actually this report yesterday in the Wall Street Journal talks about the increasing share of Chinese FDI in Fiji. So there's more and more activity going from Asia to the Pacific, because it is hoped that the Pacific does not hold only a lot of fishing resources, but also minerals in the seabed. And obviously there is a big labor movement going out of the Pacific for some countries, but also going into the Pacific. And then aid flows are still very important, especially for these microstates. Some of them are among the most aid-dependent countries in the world, and especially Australia is a very large provider of official development aid. So, as a next step, we thought, what are the actually non-structural constraints for the Pacific to link better into Asia? And we looked first at the trade costs, and then at the business environment. And just to give you some indications where the Pacific is, I looked up some numbers for Thailand and compared them with the Pacific. So, for example, in the first graph here, we have the time to export and the time to import. Should be the time importing and exporting. So the blue one, I think, is these are time export of 2006 and 2014. Sorry. We see that Thailand has been very successful in cutting down the number of days to export. However, the success in the Pacific countries in terms of reducing the number to export was very much mixed, or that there was not any progress. When you look at the ease of doing business, we see that Thailand in 2014 or 15 came out among the 30 most competitive economies. However, we see that the rank of the Pacific economies, they're really very low and range among the least friendly countries to do business. I have 2 minutes left, so I will quickly go through the rest of the report. So what are our policy recommendations? So we think that the countries should do more to lower trade costs. On one hand, it means, for example, increasing the trade openness, trying to agree on more FTAs, also to invest into physical infrastructure. Then on the business environment side, we think that they could do more in creating a more business-friendly environment. They still have a lot of state-owned enterprises that hinder the lowering of, for example, communication costs. Then they should also do more in strengthening the educational outcomes, promoting innovation. So what are our key messages? We think that Asia's continued economic growth can actually increase the demand for products and services offered by the Pacific developing countries. We see a lot of potential in niche markets and also in tourism. Then we've seen over the last years that the Pacific countries, they have done a lot to improve their non-structural constraints. However, we think that more can be done. Then we also, message number 4 is that the investment in physical infrastructure needs to be increased. ADB is doing a lot of projects to increase the connectivity of the Pacific. And finally, the Pacific countries, they are in a very delicate environment when it comes to natural resources. So we need a very careful management of the natural resources. I will keep these, or how much time is left? Okay. Anyway, the report should be available in January 2015, and I'm looking forward to receiving your comment. Thank you very much.
Alright, lastly, we have me as the discussions, and I'm gonna make it very short. So, basically, I see through all these presentations, and I get one, the most important point that comes to me is that